going on, everybody? Max Ralph and Johnny McGonigal here on the PennLive Blue-White Breakdown. We are just days away from the season opener. It's kind of crazy that it's almost here, Johnny.
I know, Max. I feel like, we spent all off season, even going back, winter workouts, spring camp, those random availabilities that we would have in the summer. I know you enjoyed Lift for Life right in the middle there in July. Big Ten Media Days,
Yep.
the list goes on of things that we've been covering. We've been talking to the players, to the coaches for months now. And finally, now we're just a couple days away from kickoff from the season that we've been previewing now forever. We finally have some real football to talk about in a couple days. We're still in that preview stage, though, Max. I know that we'll be giving our picks and previewing this Penn State-West Virginia game, what Penn State and how Penn State looks going into week one, the season opener of a season with high stakes, highly anticipated, 12-team playoff, new Big Ten, a lot to be excited and interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. Week one is always so weird because you spend so much time with the team you're covering, and then they play someone else. So everybody loves their team in preseason, right? So
everyone's in the best shape of their lives. Everyone is
right.
as explosive as they've ever been. Hope springs eternal, all that good stuff. Mm-hmm. But finally, we have some football to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. So last night I was out at practice. We had our 15 minutes, just a couple of quick news bits before we preview the game. Caden Saunders, wide receiver and the starting punt returner, he's dealing with bumps and bruises, as James Franklin loves to call it. He was out there, but he was pretty limited in drills. Khalil Dinkins was not out there, who might be Penn State's number 2 tight end this year. But in return, we're going to see a lot of Andrew Rapplier and a decent amount of Luke Reynolds, which is interesting because we've heard great things about those 2 young tight ends. And then the last thing that isn't really a huge deal, but was just interesting, Jackson Smolik, who had a significant injury through the spring. He's probably the number 4 quarterback because of that this year, even behind Grunkemeyer, the freshman. But he was back out there and doing some throwing. So some interesting stuff there. I think the Caden Saunders and the tight end news is worth some discussion because of the guys who we might see in their stead.
Yeah, definitely pertinent when we talk about week one. Jackson Smolik, good for him, to be back out on the field after, like you said, Max, a significant injury during spring ball that might have stunted his development or growth on the field. But we heard all off season, starting from the top with James Franklin, that he was really pleased with how Jackson Smolik had progressed from a mental standpoint. So good to see for the reserve quarterback. But more specifically, and of greater importance really for this weekend, are those wide receivers and tight ends. Let's start with wide receiver and Caden Saunders because he's a guy who was one of the highest rated players in the 2022 recruiting class. I just did a bigger story on the 22 class and the importance of that group. Singleton, Aller, Abdul Carter, the whole, Denai Dennis Sutton, and how they're really angling and pushing towards a playoff berth in their junior seasons. But a lot of contributors from that group, but Caden Saunders hasn't really been that consistent contributor yet. And I say yet because there's still potential in there. And he's starting the season really as a backup wide receiver, but the starting punt returner, and good to see him back on the field, but intrigued to see what kind of role he has on the offense, not just week one, but, as the season progresses and, if he's dealing with bumps and bruises still, how that might affect things as he gets healthier.
Yeah, it's interesting. And if he can't return punts because he's kind of been the guy for so long, not really sure who else they might throw out there. I think there's a few young guys who had been doing it, but, it just doesn't really seem like James Franklin would trust a freshman to go out there and do it in week one on the road. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. But we've mentioned the wide receivers a ton all summer, and I think it's worth talking about the way James Franklin has talked about his wide receivers and kind of trying to manage expectations for them. Trey Wallace and Liam Clifford have been the 2 guys that he has just been pounding the table for over and over again in this camp. And I think the takeaway there is that he's confident that they're going to be good this year. Like James Franklin usually won't say things like the things he said about those two guys unless he knows that they're going to deliver. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, Max. I mean, it's very easy for James to, fall back on kind of how we handled the offensive line a couple of years ago when he was like, yeah, I talked in the previous offseason about how good they were going to be. And you know what? I'm just not going to do that now. Like, we'll just let you guys see and, whatever. James Franklin has been known in press conference settings and post-practice availability settings to be vague when he wants to be vague. And so the fact that he's been abundantly clear really over the last couple weeks, throughout preseason camp and now into game week, that it's been Harrison Wallace and it's been Liam Clifford as Penn State's two top receivers. I don't think that's something anyone should ignore. And I don't necessarily think that means, Julian Fleming is not going to have a role on this team, but I do think maybe expectations should be reset a little bit on what Julian is going to provide this offense, at least early. Again, we're talking about week one. It's a 12-game regular season, and as the players and coaches have said all offseason, they're hoping it's a 17-game season with a conference championship game and a playoff run in them. But for right now, it is Harrison Wallace and it is Liam Clifford, and I think we should take that at face value from James Franklin.
Yeah, I'm with you. And the Julian Fleming thing, it's just he was that 5-star prospect out of high school, and everybody's excited that he's here. But if you're expecting him to be that, like you're misguided at this point because he's in his 5th year. He's dealt with the injuries. It's just not what you can expect from him. But James has also said that they expect a good year from him. It's just been a little bit more. It's just been a little bit more vague, like you said. It's been less pound the table like it was with the other two, and to some extent with Omari Evans as well. Because Omari, he talked at length last night about Omari, and it's like, hey, this guy's speed and everything can really flip the conversations we're having about him. So if Andy Kotelnicki can unlock Omari Evans, that might be a number 3 guy who we're really talking about a ton. But with Fleming again, I think Penn State really appreciates what he brings to the locker room and the other things that he can do on the field besides just catch the ball. And I think that he's valuable. I think he's going to play. But yeah, you just can't expect him to be like the number 1 receiver or to just break out like some people are certainly going to hope that he will.
Yeah, I mean, he's 23 years old. You mentioned the injuries, Max. I mean, when I talked to him back in April at the end of spring camp, he was just thrilled that it was his first spring camp he made it through in his college career without a significant injury or a surgery. So, he is not the same, springy prospect he was, back at Southern Columbia when he was a 5-star, but there's still, something to be tapped, or I guess maybe untapped there with Julian Fleming. And it's interesting you mentioned Omari Evans because, we saw the straight line speed on full display against Michigan State last year at times elsewhere throughout the season, but he's another guy in that 2022 recruiting class. The wide receivers, Caden Saunders, Omari Evans, Anthony Ivey has, and Tyler Johnson as well, a couple of reserves. It's time for, a couple of those receivers, or at least one of them, to provide a real spark and a consistent production, for this team, because we've seen it at every other position. We've seen it at quarterback, running back, offensive line, on the defensive side of the ball. And I think if Penn State can get something consistent, from Omari, from Caden, even if it's just consistently one play a game from Omari Evans, and it's a big play, if it's an explosive play, I think Penn State's offense, especially looking at how it was last year with explosive plays, I think they would take that. And so I think Omari has the speed to be a difference maker, and I'm really intrigued to see how Andy Kotelnicki decides to utilize him in the offense, whether that's more vertical shots or more close to the line of scrimmage and let him kind of go and get going into the open field. We'll see. But yeah, we can't talk enough about this wide receiver room, Max, because it's funny because we've been talking about him for well over a year now. I mean, especially all off season. But as we, pick up little nuggets here and there from James and the players and the other assistant coaches, it better forms our thinking on this group that is very clearly the number one question mark for this team going into the season.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't get old, to be honest. And I think analyzing the way that coaches are talking about him is the best thing about him. I mean, the receivers is just the best way that we can kind of advance that conversation right now, because it is interesting. But I also got to do a little bit of a self plug. Had a pretty big story on Trey Wallace this week. Talked with his parents, his high school coach, just how much he's ready to kind of take that leap after the injuries last year. Certainly Max, an interesting guy.
Yeah, it was an excellent story. PennLive readers, listeners, subscribers, if you haven't already, check that out. Trey Wallace you talk about a guy who can be explosive, and in many different areas. His vertical is absurd. The guy just has to stay healthy. I do think, though, and it was and we can get to this in a second, Max, but we published our Penn State-West Virginia picks or predictions. And we always have little subsections aside from just the pick. And mine was, for don't be surprised if ... And it was if Harrison Wallace shines, because we saw last year in the opener against West Virginia before he dealt with those injuries, 7 catches, 76 yards or 72 yards. He can be a reliable presence, a kind of a catch hog, a ball hog if you need him to be, but also he can take the top off of defense. So, hoping that he can stay healthy, not only, for Penn State's offense and us watching Penn State's offense, but for Harrison Wallace more specifically.
Yeah. Just go look up his high school basketball highlights, because every single one of them is him dunking. It's kind of insane. But yeah, he's a fun guy. Certainly one to watch. Let's talk West Virginia. That's a good segue. Let's get into the game here. I mean, just first thing, like what's on your mind about this one, Johnny?
I just think it's going to be, well, first of all, the atmosphere, environment. I'm just excited as someone who grew up just a huge college football fan and still a huge fan of the sport. Excited to be at a new stadium, new environment, one that me and Bob talked about this earlier this week on the podcast, but one that is going to be juiced and energized, and they're going to be jumping down there. So yeah, just excited for that, and excited for the season to start in such a cool environment. But the game itself, I'm looking at. We just talked a lot about Penn State's receivers and the offense. I'm looking to see what the defense looks like under Tom Allen, and more specifically, what the run defense looks like under Tom Allen, because this is a West Virginia team that, I mean, if all stays the same from last season, which they bring back a lot of pieces from last season, so you would think they would lean on those strengths again, it's going to be a heavy running attack. I mean, West Virginia had the 6th most rushing attempts in the country last year. They returned their top 2 tailbacks, who each had over 700 yards rushing. Garrett Green, who is a solid passer, but certainly can use his legs and put defense in conflict. Especially those defensive ends are going to have to keep the edge and hold the edge and do a good job there. And everyone else is going to have to swarm in run support. That's what I'm really looking forward to seeing, because if West Virginia is able to come out and pop you in the mouth early with the running game and establish that. And I hate saying establish a run, but it is, especially in a week 1 game, I think really important. And if they're able to do that, this is going to be a 4-quarter game.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, that's the key to any upset is be physical early, running the ball. The one thing that's in Penn State's favor is that a couple of really good offensive linemen are gone from last year's West Virginia team, namely Zach Frazier, the center leader up there in the middle, who's over with the Steelers now. But the running backs are really good. Green is a solid player. He's going to make some mistakes passing the ball. He's going to miss some throws, but his legs are legit. I asked Kobe King about him last night, and he was just like, well, we have Bo in practice, so it's kind of Bo Pribula, kind of the same thing. So they feel prepared for it. I'm looking at the secondary of both of these teams, because West Virginia has a couple of transfers coming in, just like Penn State. Nobody really has a ton of seniors in that defensive backfield. Yeah. Obviously, Penn State's safeties are very good, but the corner room is a little bit more inexperienced in that boat. So knowing that Garrett Green is going to throw the ball around the yard a little bit, certainly curious to see how those cornerbacks play. And then, I mean, it just tags on to what we've been talking about is Penn State's receivers. against a West Virginia unit that is, missing a couple of guys who went pro last year. Again, another Steeler, Beanie Bishop is kind of the big name I think of, but the Steelers just love their West Virginia guys lately. But
Yeah.
that's I digress. But yeah, so the quarterbacks on both sides, interesting for me in this one.
Yeah, and not only from a Penn State perspective, not only just how they do, but who it is out there at corner, because we've heard all offseason after Kalen King, Johnny Dixon, Daquan Hardy move on. We heard from Terry Smith. We've heard from James Franklin, praising Terry Smith for his ability to reload in the corner room. They've got a lot of guys, and ultimately, by the end of the season, we're talking about a more talented corner room than Penn State had last year. But we still don't really know exactly who's going to be the two that walks out on the field first on the first team defense. You've got Cam Miller returning. He's got the most experience among returning Penn State corners, but they bring in A.J. Harris from Georgia, the former five-star younger guy. We saw him flying around the blue-white game and pretty impressively. Jalen Kimber, who has a lot of experience. He started, I think it was 11 games for Florida last year, and then transferred in along with A.J. Harris. Elliott Washington, Zion Tracy, two guys who had a lot of run in the Peach Bowl. And then Aldavian Collins, who, and you talk at Max about, listening to the coaches, and when they're hammering home something and when they're being very obvious about something, it's worth writing down and worth keeping in the back of your mind. Aldavian Collins, it's been said about him several times throughout the offseason that he was one of the most improved players, not only just in the corner room, but in the entire program. I mean, he won the most improved defensive player award, I believe it was, with spring camp. And so you have all these different pieces. It's just a matter of putting together the puzzle, and figuring out the right combination. And I think that's going to take some time, just like right tackle will, which is another spot that I'm really intrigued by. Donko and Rucci, competing there. But on the road, in a really hostile environment, intrigued to see what those rotations and the start of those combinations look like at corner.
Yeah, me too. The lack of experience is going to be tough in that environment that you mentioned. And that was my don't be surprised if. You mentioned yours with Trey Wallace. Mine was if West Virginia moves the ball through the air a little bit, because yes, these Penn State corners are very talented. And by the end of the year, I think they're going to be dang good. But week one, new defensive coordinator, a lot of new faces. It could take some time to gel. So that was my thing that I pointed out. But I also think they're going to get an interception and maybe two of them.
I would peg KJ Winston for one of those. I just think KJ Winston. We've talked about him. I wrote a pretty big feature on him last week. I just think that he's one of the best defensive players in the country. I really believe that, and certainly one of the best safeties in the country. Last year, he made his name being all around the ball and making some plays through the air, but being so not only violent but sure-handed in run support and tackling. I think he is due for a huge season, and this is I mean as good a stage as ever to announce yourself again to a national audience and make a big play. And that's kind of my bold prediction, is that I think KJ Winston gets a pick.
He could be a first rounder next year pretty easily, in my opinion. And I'm with you. I think Zachy Wheatley might be the guy who gets one.
The takeaway king. The takeaway king.
If Zachy Wheatley is nothing else, he gets turnovers. And it's kind of the thing that we've heard from coaches. And it's it maybe sounds like drinking the Kool-Aid, but we saw it. I mean, literally 2 years ago, he came on the field, barely played, but every time he was out there was a turnover. So
that Auburn game at Auburn, I believe he forced the fumble.
Yeah, a big one.
Yeah. It was him and Jalen Reed combined on that.
Yeah, which is a whole nother aspect to that cornerback discussion, is that Penn State wants to have three safeties on the field a lot this year, which limits what we'll be able to see from those other guys. Let's do real predictions. We said we wanted to keep this tight, and I think we could just talk forever as always. But let's do our actual predictions now. So Johnny, lay it on me.
Sorry, you cut out there a little bit, Max. You throwing it to
Oh,
me?
yeah. Lay it on me for your actual prediction.
All right. So I've got Penn State winning this game 34 to 23. Like I mentioned, the environment I think is going to be something to deal with for Penn State. Three new coordinators will be something to deal with for Penn State. Just getting, knocking off the rust and getting used to, how Andy Kotelnicki calls a game, and Tom Allen, and even Justin Lustig, and just the
Hmm.
logistics behind everything. I think is something that we can't ignore. But I think Drew Aller is going to hit on a couple of big plays. I think the running game, after lacking those explosive plays last year, I think we're going to see one or two from Nick and Katron that really, maybe turn a drive or make turn a drive from kind of stagnant into electric, if that makes sense. And I think Penn State ultimately pulls away. And I say pulls away. I mean, I think they win by 11. I think they put this thing to bed about midway through the fourth quarter and able to get a wrangle on it. But I do think it's going to be a tight game at halftime, and Penn State ultimately, though, I think ends up 1-0.
I think the second half team thing is probably sticking with us here this week in Morgantown, just because of the environment and those factors you mentioned. But I do think in the end, I agree. I think Penn State's going to win pretty comfortably. Is the word I'll use. I had 34-20. I just think that running the ball is going to be almost easy for Penn State. There's a young sophomore linebacker on the other side for West Virginia, Cutter, who was really good last year. But besides him, they are missing just about every guy who put up any kind of numbers for them. They did not get after the passer very well. I just think Penn State's going to be more physical and win in the trenches. And the great thing about that is it means Drew Aller and those receivers don't have to be all-stars.
Yeah.
So I think they'll make just enough plays. I think that the Penn State offense looks good in the second half and has moments in the first half. Defense will take a little bit to get going, probably give up 2 touchdowns or an early touchdown, and then kind of buckle down until a late one. I got 34-20. I think the Lions handle business.
I like it. I think Bob, looking at our predictions staff wide, our guy Bob Flounders has Penn State winning 29-20.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Hermit, excellent photographer, the best in the biz,
The
has
GOAT,
Penn State winning. The GOAT, truly the GOAT. I mean, the only man who is willing to
truly.
put his leg on the line, ankle on the line at
Yeah.
Northwestern.
Stab
And
himself with a monopod. I mean,
Joe Herman has Penn State winning 30-20.
yep.
And so, yeah, it's a PennLive sweep. I'm just excited for college football, Max. I'm pumped that it's back. I'm not necessarily stoked for the drive to the Morgantown area. I think we're
Yep.
stopping just outside Morgantown.
Yep.
It's going to be a beautiful drive, but I am very excited for the season. I know you are as well.
Yeah, me too. Tired of the hope runs eternal stage of college football. Preseason is enjoyable for about 2 weeks, and then it's just like, all right, bring me some games. And I'm tired of them being on the PlayStation only. So
That's funny. Awesome, man. Well, hey, this has been the Blue White Breakdown presented by PennLive. Max Ralph, Johnny McGonigal will be there in Morgantown on Saturday, as well as Bob Flounders and Joe Hermit. The whole PennLive team will be there for Penn State's season opening game at West Virginia. Follow our coverage on PennLive.com. Follow us on Twitter. Subscribe to our tech subscriber base where we give tidbits and nuggets of information that we don't otherwise put out there. Things that we're hearing and seeing, opinions, analysis, all that good stuff. So be sure to do that, and obviously subscribe to PennLive if you don't already. No better time than right now before the season starts. But Max, looking forward to seeing you down in Morgantown, and looking forward to week 1.
yes, sir. See ya.